this evening, so we're one chapter away, and I believe we will conclude chapter 21 this evening. As you find your place, if you would stand with me, we're going to read several verses together this evening. Revelation chapter 21, we're going to begin our reading in verse 9, and we're going to read all the way to the end of the chapter this evening. So let's begin reading in Revelation 21, verse 9. And there came unto me one of the seven angels which had the seven vials full of the seven last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal, and had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city, and the gates thereof, and the wall thereof. And the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. And he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits, according to the measure of man, that is, of the angel. And the building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. And the foundations of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth an emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth a topaz, the 10th chrysoprasus, the 11th a jacinth, the 12th an amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gates was of one pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, as it were transparent glass. And I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. And they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. And there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination, or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. And we pause there. Thank you. You may be seated. making so much havoc with me right off the bat as I wasn't able to get James a copy so he knew when to change the presentation on the screen, and so I'm going to be telling him change now. So James, change now. In this chapter we have some things that are new going on. In chapter 21 and verse 1 you see a new heaven. You see a new earth. And in verse 2 you see something that I will call a new city. You find it called the New Jerusalem. In verse 9, an angel spoke with John, and so in verse 9, where our text begins tonight, it says, "And there came unto me one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials full of the 7 last plagues." Now, if you'll remember that vial, and the word vial, it has in its definition bowl. There are 3 kinds of judgments you'll remember that Revelation talks about. And in those 3 kinds of judgments that God is putting upon, in particularly the Jews, is what he's really judging, but it's upon the entire globe. One of them is the vial judgments. And so with these vial judgments, we've got one of the 7 angels, 7 vials that were poured out upon the earth. And of those 7 vials, each one held by an angel, one of those 7 angels that held one of the vial judgments is now come to talk to John now again. Last time John saw him, he had a judgment, a vial filled with judgment that he's ready to pour out upon mankind. This time he wants to talk to John, and he says in verse 9, "Come hither, and I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife." Now, I'm pretty confident that if I could talk to that angel, whichever angel it is, and if I could ask him this question, which one did you have the most fun with? Pouring out the judgment or showing, introducing the bride of the Lamb to John? I'm pretty sure he'd say any day of the week, I would like to introduce the bride. That vile judgment was tough on me even to watch it as it happened. So I would rather, I'm pretty sure he had more enjoyment introducing the bride of Christ to John. And I find it interesting as well that John's a part of that bride. Remember, John's still on earth. He's seeing a vision of this bride, but in all reality, because John is a saved individual, he's part of that bride. He's just getting to see something that's ahead of time before it actually transpires. Well, in chapter 17 and verse 3, and let's look over there because it's close proximity. John chapter 17 and verse 3, we find here, it says, "So he carried me away in the Spirit into the wilderness." And when that happens, we find that he saw a woman there in verse 3 of Revelation 17. And this is a sinful woman. I called her a woman of the world, but she represented lost humanity. She represented a false religious system. If you'll remember, it talks about it in verse 1. And this is a bad woman. This woman, in all reality, is not a woman. She is a religious system. Like in our text, the scripture said about this new Jerusalem, it called it she. And so this is a religious system. God called it a she, but there's a woman introduced in Revelation 17:3. In Revelation 21 and verse 9, our text, we've got an angel, and he's introducing a woman to us. But in this case, it's a good woman. This one is the bride of Christ, the Lamb's wife. The angel gave John these descriptions and showing us 2 different women from 2 different systems, and in all reality it shows that what I have said before, that all of humanity can be divided into 2 groups, and these 2 who they've chosen to follow are those 2 groups. The angel gave John description not of Babylon this time. He gave description of Babylon in Revelation chapters 18 and 19. One was the religious system, the other was political. 19, or let me see if I'm saying it right, I think it's 18. 17 and 18 And chapter 18, it is the actual city, the literal city. This time he's not describing Babylon in the slightest. He's describing the New Jerusalem. He's not describing this scarlet woman, this woman dressed in scarlet. He's describing the bride of Christ. So there's a difference that's transpired now. This shows the relationship between what we have going on here is a new heaven and a new earth that's going on. We had an old earth that was there, an earthly Jerusalem, but now we've got a heavenly Jerusalem that's transpiring. Then twice it is said that this city, if you look at it in verse 2, in verse 2 it says, "And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem," catch the next phrase, "coming down from God out of heaven." So that's the heavenly Jerusalem, but it's the New Jerusalem. And you see it coming down from God out of heaven. If you come to verse 10, you see it saying, "He carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God." And so we've got a heavenly city that is descending. We've got a new heaven and a new earth. That's what we've got. And in this new heaven and this new earth, we've got this new Jerusalem in verse 2 coming down from God. And it's not heaven itself, but it comes from heaven. I think that's important. That's what I was trying to get us to see, that in verse 2 it says, "coming down from God out of heaven." And then in verse 10, it says it is descending out of heaven. So it's important to understand this New Jerusalem is not heaven itself, because it came out of heaven. Now, if I were to say that Sacramento is a beautiful city, you would know that I was referring to, in that kind of a statement, that I was referring to the structure of the buildings, or the beautiful trees, or the river that goes through, but I'd be making reference to things of that caliber. But if I were to say that Sacramento is a wicked city, you would then know that I wasn't talking about the buildings, but I was talking about the people. Because wickedness does not come from buildings, it comes from people. Now, in the same way, God talks about Jerusalem. When you look at this statement in verse 2 of Revelation 21, he said, "I, John, saw the holy city." Well, what made the city holy? Well, it's first off not any structure that's just there for the sake of it being there, such as we'll look at the walls and the foundations. The walls and the foundations of themselves are not holy. But what makes it holy will be the one, meaning Christ, and his people that live there. That's what makes it holy. In this city, the saints of Christ, the saints of God, will live in this city. Now look at verses 11, and I'm going to read 3 verses for us. And follow along, please. "Having the glory," we're talking about this this city's got many descriptions. We've got a name, Jerusalem. We've got it called new. We've got it called holy. In verse 10, or in verse 11, verse 10, we've got it called great. And so we find that this city is getting great descriptions. In verse 11, "having the glory of God, and her light was likened to a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal, and had a wall, great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel." Let me pause, and I'm going to underline something here. I find it interesting, and I considered this as I studied this, that there are 12 gates and there are 12 angels. Now, we don't necessarily understand exactly what those angels at the gates are about. I'm going to give a speculation. They're like a sentinel, a guard, standing at the gate. Maybe that's what it's about. I'm not dogmatically sure, because if we say there's a guard at the gate, then that makes us ask a question that I don't have an answer for. Who could go in the gate that God would say, you can't come, to such a degree that I have to put a guard there? So, I don't have answers. Maybe God just sees fit to have angels standing there just for the sake of them standing there, and just maybe it offers, just like a police officer roaming in our streets. We have police officers that park in our parking lots every now and then. I'll go out and talk with them and have good conversations with them, but I tell them, I want you to park here every chance you can. Every time you have a lunch break, I said, come here for your lunch break. And so you say, why is that? Well, it's not necessarily to stop trouble as much as it gives me peace of mind knowing they're out there at 3 in the morning. And so it may be something of that nature that's going on. Let me read verse 13, talking about these gates. It says, on the east, 3 gates. On the north, 3 gates. On the south, 3 gates. And on the west, 3 gates. Turn with me over, obviously keep a place here, to the book of Acts. We're going to chapter 9. Acts chapter 9. I want to go to verse 3. We're inside this city, or we're looking at this city, and we read down through verse 13. I want you to notice in Acts chapter 9 and verse 3, the scripture says, and as he, and that's Saul who became Paul, as he journeyed, he came near Damascus. And suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven. Okay, now come back to Revelation chapter 21 with me, and I want us to notice that in this place called the New Jerusalem that we're looking at, that there is a light here that we're going to begin to see in verse 11, and having the glory of God. And here we find the city called her, and her light was like unto a stone most precious. So we've got a light. We say, what's this light from? I'm going to tell you, and probably it'll show more clearly as I go on, that this light is coming from the glory of God, just like Acts chapter 9, when God all of a sudden pulled the curtain back and Saul could see God. He saw this light shining. You say, you sure? Remember in Matthew 27, we've got Christ on what's called the Mount of Transfiguration, and on the Mount of Transfiguration, that he glowed and had a brightness about him, and it was his glory. Remember Moses on Mount Sinai, when he came down, he had absorbed some of the brightness of God himself, so bright that the people had to put a veil over his face, because he glowed too bright. They didn't have sunglasses back then. And he glowed too bright. And so with that being the case, we've got this kind. You say, well, what is the light that is made reference to in verse 11? Well, it said right before it, having the glory of God, and that's what I believe it is. I believe the glory of God is giving this light. Go to verse 23 of Revelation 21, and you'll notice something else about it. And in verse 23, just hang in there, James, I'm not ready to change slides yet. It says, and the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it. Why? For the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. Okay, so when you come back to verse 11, having the glory of God and her light, we taught that light that's lighting this city. Verse 23 tells us very clearly that it is the light of the glory of God. There is a glow, there is an aura, there is a brightness to the glory of God, so bright that it lights this entire city to such a degree that there is no need of the sun. Why? Because we got something brighter than the sun, the glory of God shining. So that's what's going on. The Greek word for the word light back in Acts chapter 9 and verse 3 is used only one other time in the New Testament. That light that was talking about in verse 3 of Acts 9, and one other time, and that's found in Philippians chapter 2, I'll read it to you, that ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God, without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world. What's God saying? He's saying that keep in mind, that's the same Greek word Acts 9:3 was when it was talking about the glory of God light shining around Saul. Then now the only other time in the New Testament that Greek word is used is right there in Philippians 2:15 when he says, we're the lights of the world. And what he's saying is that the glory of God should so reside within a born-again child of God that light should shine to people, not that they see us, not that it attracts attention to us, but it's the light of the glory of God through the people of God to a lost, hell-bound world. In our text, Revelation 21, we find that there are 12 gates. These 12 gates, I'm looking at verse 12, and had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates. Now keep in mind, we've got a New Jerusalem, this city. We find that this city has walls, and we'll look at those walls here in a minute, and that those walls have gates on them. And at the gates, we found that there were 12 angels, an angel per gate. And the names were written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. So in this, we find that there are 12 gates that are identified with the tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes. We find there are 12 foundations, and those 12 foundations are going to be identified with the 12 apostles. Look at verse 14. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So what we've got, everybody gets saved the same way. It doesn't matter if it's Old Testament, New Testament, or tribulation saints, or whatever. Everybody gets saved the same way, and that's through Jesus Christ. Some are putting their faith in what they're looking back to. Some are putting their faith in what they're looking forward to. But everybody gets saved the same way. But what he did was he took those before Christ and he took those after Christ. The before Christ, there at the gate, and that's the representation, the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. The after Christ, after crucifixion, we've got the, I'll call them New Testament believers, and he has them represented by the 12 apostles. Why? That's a good question. If you think about it when you get to heaven, you're going to need to ask God why he did it that way. I don't have answers. I'm just telling you that's what he's got. The city's description follows the pattern of cities of today, and the cities of today that we have three things that we can name. There is a foundation, or foundations in this case. There are gates, and there are walls. I probably should have said walls first, because a gate without a wall is not worth much. So there are foundations, walls, and gates. And that's similar to what we have today. James, if you would take it to a new slide on the screen, please. You've got foundations. Foundations are symbolic of permanence. Foundations are. Tents are not permanent. They don't have a foundation. At least not the tent I was on. Man, I laid on some and was laying on flat ground, and it's not comfortable. And when you wake up, my back was feeling okay. I'm not after the tent thing, but a tent has no foundation. It's not permanent. That's right. But you've got a foundation under this, and it shows that there is a permanency there. You've got walls and gates. Walls and gates show us protection. Even down to these angels. There's an angel at each gate. If it's there for protection, I cannot say that for sure because it brings those questions that I don't have answers to. But there are angels there. We've got protections that are there. We've got the walls. We've got the gates. Somebody asked me one time, do you think the Bible would put its stamp of approval of America putting walls on its borders to keep people from coming into the country? I say, well, heaven, or the New Jerusalem has walls about it. And so that's all I know to say. I'm not saying God's in on this or not. I don't know everything there is about that. But I know if you're asking me the question just like you asked it, I have to say the New Jerusalem has walls. God's people will never have to fear an enemy. You can close your eyes at night and not have to lock the doors. That's the way it was back in the 60s. That's the way it was. I can remember as about a 12-year-old, we were going to see my grandparents for 2 or 3 days. I remember the first time Dad said, we better lock the doors this time. He never locked our doors. But this time he said, we better. Well, we don't have to lock our doors when we get to heaven. What a wonderful thing that is. What a wonderful thing that is. In this, we find that there's a word that is great. The word great, I was talking about it earlier as a description of the city. If you were to come back to verse 10, you would see it. You'll see it in verse 12 as well, that it had a wall great and high. And the word great means high, large, mighty, strong. We'll talk about this wall, and we'll see here in a little bit what makes this wall have a description of great. We'll see that here in a few minutes. But that's the definition of the word great in verse 12. High, large, mighty, strong. In verse 13, it says that there are 4 gates. 4 sides that have 3 gates each. East 3 gates, north 3 gates, south 3 gates, and west 3 gates. The number of the gates, again, corresponds with the number that would be symbolic to the children of Israel. That's what he was after, the tribes of them. The idea seems to be that there would be ample opportunity to go in and out. That there would be easy accessibility. 12 gates. There would be easy accessibility. And at the gates, there's these 12 angels, and I've already bumped on that some. In verse 12, it talks of these things going on, this New Jerusalem, this eternal residency of the children of God, and this is indicated that there will be this easy accessibility for anybody to go in and out. Now, let's look at verse 14. The wall of the city had 12 foundations. The wall of the city. So the number of the foundations, we see it attached to the apostles. Look at verse 15. And he that talked with me, that's one of the angels that had one of the vials of judgment. He that talked with me had a golden reed, it says, to measure the city, and the gate thereof, and the wall thereof. In other words, God had a measurement that he wanted everything to be. And if anybody wanted to challenge it, they could say, listen, I just had it surveyed. There's the heavenly surveyor. Go look at his records. He can do that kind of stuff. But the word reed, you saw it there saying he had a golden reed. A reed is approximately, for us in this time frame, 10 feet. So you get one reed. That's 10 feet, the measurement. Notice in verse 16, and the city lieth 4 square. And the length is as large as the breadth, and he measureth the city with the reed. Here's what he said about how many reeds it took. He talks about it being 10,000 furlongs. Let me give you a definition of the word furlong, if I can spot it there. Furlong, 1 furlong, 582 feet. 12,000 furlongs. Well, the way you find the answer is get your calculator out and you go 12,000 times 582. You're going to get a large number. But if you were to divide that by 5,200, however many feet it takes to get 1 mile, you'll find that 12,000 furlongs comes out to 1,500 miles. That's what it comes out to. And what he just said was, in verse 16, we're talking about a city. What he just said was, in verse 16, he said, the length is as large as the breadth. In other words, it's as long that way as it is this way. How long is it that way? 1,500 miles. So how long will it be this way? 1,500 miles. And it says, and he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs, that's 1,500 miles, the length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. That's 1,500 miles from here to there, this New Jerusalem. And then if you went over here, it's 1,000 miles from here to there. And then if you looked upward, it's 1,500 miles from here to there. It's quite a place. That's quite a place that we're staring at. In other words, to help us understand it just a little bit, if you were standing on the northern tip of Maine in the United States, if you took off on a straight line to go 1,500 miles, you would be in Florida. If you were to go from the east coast where the Atlantic Ocean is behind you and you started going west, you would go 600 miles past the Mississippi River until you reached 1,500 miles. Let me state it a little bit more like this. This city is larger than half of the United States. This place is enormous. This place is enormous. Notice in verse 17. And he measured the wall thereof, and he says, 144 cubits. Okay, 144 cubits. 1 cubit, 18 inches, or 1.5 feet. That's a cubit. 1.5 feet, a cubit. How many cubits are there in verse 18, or verse 17? 144 cubits. So when you say 144 times 1.5, to bring it into feet, you're going to come out to 216. What's it talking about here? He's measuring the wall. We already know the wall is that way 1,500 feet. We know it's that way 1,500 miles. It's that way 1,500 miles. There's only one other measurement left, and this is the width of the wall itself. And the width of the wall is 216 feet wide, 1,500 miles long, and 1,500 miles tall. Wow, quite a wall. Talk about building a wall. He makes a statement that I've read it many times, but since entering this text, I've studied it and found out what I believe the answer is. He says that 144 in verse 17 cubits, and then he makes this statement according to the measure of man, that is, of the angel. And I believe what it's talking about is that this is an angel. This is the New Jerusalem, the heavenly city. And an angel measured it. And so it's like he said this. Let me talk where you can understand my measurements. It's as if he said that man would say 216 feet, or at that time, man would say 144 cubits. I don't know what they say in heaven. I don't know that. But nonetheless, As man measured it, okay, we could even take it from here. 2,000 years ago, they said 144 cubits. As America would say it, we would say 216 feet. So that's kind of what's going on here. From the time it was put, they said cubits, to the time today, I say feet. From a heavenly survey, he says, I don't know what. But as man would say it at that time, they would say cubits. Notice in verse 18. It says, and the building of the wall of it was of jasper. The word building means material. The material of the wall of it was of jasper. This wall was made of jasper. We've got a foundation that's made of jasper as well, but we've got a wall that's made of jasper. This is a wall, and it's above the foundation. It's not counted as part of the 12 foundations, because we're going to find that the first foundation is jasper. And so some have thought, is it feasible that that first foundation and the wall are one and the same? And the answer is no. You've got a jasper wall standing on the first of 12 foundations, a jasper foundation. James, let me look back and see if I've missed telling you to change. There, we're doing pretty good. There. Number 3. Yeah, go ahead and change just for a second, James, and let me catch everybody up. I failed to do it. James, if you would go ahead and change it. There you go. There's the reeds, about 10 feet. Change it again, please. Furlongs, chapter in verse 16, 582 feet, 582, 12,000 furlongs, 1,500 miles. And change it one more time, please. You got a cubit. The cubit is 18 inches. The wall of the city was measured 144 cubits, or 216 feet. I failed to put the word feet in, thick. And change her again. There. Now we're up to where I am in my text as I'm looking at it. Now we're looking at the foundations. The foundations begin in verse 19. And the foundations of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. Some have tried to speculate about these precious stones. They have tried to say, well, probably there was a foundation there and the precious stones are just put on the outside. I disagree with that. I believe the foundation is entirely whatever the stone is, whatever it says. And so in verse 19 it says, and you're looking at it on the screen, that jasper is the first foundation. Remember, you got a jasper wall on top of foundation number 1, a jasper foundation. That's the first one. Then it goes to several others. I'm looking through because I'll tell you what I did today. That number 3. By the way, I'm giving you the colors of what they are. Jasper has like about 5 colors, potentially, of jasper. Yellow, brown, black. There's a black jasper. And then there is a dark green jasper. That's also part of a jasper. So exactly, I don't think anybody can tell us exactly which color goes with that foundation, but we can get close. The sapphire, the second one, is blue. What shade of blue? Don't know. Third foundation. Now, let me tell you what I did today. I was afraid Tennessee language or Tennessee way of talking would come out. Because the way I said that word, number 3rd foundation, I always said Chalcedony. That's the way I said it. But I wanted to be sure I said it right. And so I asked my phone, how do you pronounce this word? And I put the accent on the D-O-N-Y, chalcedony. And they said you put it on the second syllable, chalcedony. That's the way they said say it, chalcedony. Okay, anyway, it's greenish blue. You come to fourth, emerald green. You come to the fifth, sardonyx. It's like our onyx. It's white, streaked with brown. 6, sardius. That's red, sometimes blood red. 7, chrysolite. That's yellow. 8, beryl, green. 9, topaz, yellow-green. 10th, chrysoprasus. Now some say it's golden, others say it's green. 11, jacinth. Some say blues, others say yellow. 12, amethyst. It's a rich purple or a blue-red. There's one color that comes up very frequently, and the one color that comes up the most on this possibility is the word green, the color green. Now, I'm not saying this, but I'll just ask the question. Is it possible, just by looking at that, we can say God's favorite color is green? Maybe. I don't know. I don't even know if he has a favorite color. But I can say of the possibility of colors, green shows up the most on that list. Now, what an interesting thing this is, and I want us to understand that jasper, which is greenish blue, or possible, there's like 4 colors, and it doesn't even seem like they're related to me. Yellow, black, brown, green, dark green. Some of them don't even seem to be related. But what my mind became very interested in on looking at that, this whole situation we've got to this point that we can grasp, and I want you to try and imagine this in your mind. Let's imagine that you're standing on the new earth and you're gazing at the new heaven. You say, or not the new heaven, but the new Jerusalem. You say, where is this new Jerusalem? Well, I'm glad you asked. We don't really know. But we can tell you I can tell you what seems like has happened. And you're going to say, preacher, you sure? I'm going to say, no, I'm not sure, but I think. It says that the new Jerusalem comes down from heaven. It never says it makes it to the earth. We know this, that the kings of the earth and the nations are going to go and come to this place. There is enough speculation, and I thought to myself, I want to look and see what others think about this. There's enough speculation to what I'm saying that the majority of the commentators believe that the new Jerusalem hovers above the new earth. Are we sure? No. But maybe, probably. I think I can say probably. I think I can say that. But let's imagine, if that's the case, we've got the new Jerusalem there, and we're standing on this new earth, and we're looking at that new Jerusalem. What do we see? We see all these colors of the foundation. And remember, the wall that's 1,500 feet tall, 1,500 feet long, and 216 feet thick is made of that jasper that's going to have that color. And on the inside of that city is the light of God that's so bright that when Saul looked at it, it blinded him. Now, can you imagine what on the outside of that city it looks like? I mean, that sounds to me like it's dazzling. That sounds gorgeous to me. Well, I notice in verse 21, the 12 gates are changing. The 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gate of 1 pearl. Every several gate. And the street of the city was pure gold, as it were transparent glass. Well, we get the foundations are stones that come out of the earth. This is a stone that the gate is made of, but it didn't come out of the earth. This is the only one that came from something living. I've heard preachers joke about it. What size oyster was that gave a pearl like that? That doesn't make any difference. But this is something that came from something living. Quite an interesting thing. James, would you change the slide, please? And on this, I wrote the humble oyster. To be able to get a pearl has an irritation or a wound. And around the offending article, whatever it was, sometimes it's only a grain of sand, but around that offending particle that's penetrated and it's hurting it, the oyster builds this pearl to keep that thing from hurting it. We might say that the answer to the wound that the oyster is experiencing is the pearl. We might say that. What we call, or what I'm calling, the glory land, and I'll call it as this new heaven, this new Jerusalem that we're looking at, the glory land is God's answer. It's Jesus Christ. It's God's answer to the wicked man's wounds toward God, sin. And what we've got is just like the oyster for the wound made a pearl, God was, in a sense, there is a wound for mankind, there is a hurt even toward God, and the answer is Jesus Christ, and you can see the similarities betwixt Christ and the pearl. And so now, every entrance into this new city has a gate made of a pearl, and you say, why? And I don't know. I'm going to tell you why I would assume. Is to give us a reminder that Jesus Christ is that pearl of great price. And if we enter into this new Jerusalem, that there was a wound that had to have something cover it, and that something that covered it was the shed blood of Christ. My, that stirs my heart. Those pearls. Imagine the gates that are hung there. Now, I can't be dogmatic. I'm just trying to assess, and maybe the gates every bit as thick as the wall. How thick was the wall? 216 feet. Maybe the gate is as thick as the wall itself, 216 feet thick. Maybe not. It may just close up on a side of the 216 and you go through some kind of a tunnel type thing, but maybe it's that big. Imagine the enormity, the size of those gates. Think of the supernatural pearls from which they've come, how they were made. My goodness gracious, what a gigantic pearl that thing is. I mean, just the gate is enough to make you stop. I've seen some doors that were beautiful in Washington, D.C. at the National Cathedral. They have some doors that talk about kings entering in and exiting out, and they take Bible verses and they have it, and the thing is made of wood, and I stood there and looked at that door and thought, wow, that thing is beautiful, and I took pictures of it because it excited me that they used Bible verses on the doors. That they took us to the door and they said, this is where they dropped the president off, and this is the exact door he will walk through, and I saw those Bible verses there for him. Thrill my soul. Can you imagine the gate into heaven, or into this new heaven, this new Jerusalem? Well, look back with me and let me find the verse that we are in to give you verse 21. Let me read it again. I'll pause on the word after. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gate was of one pearl, and the street Your Bible should have that singular, not plural. We're talking about what we would say, the streets of this new city, but it says street, singular, is the way it says it. In other words, this is where we'll be living. But every one of us will be living on Main Street. Nobody's going to be living on a back alley street, an off-the-road street. Nobody's going to be living on that, who knows the name of that street. Nobody's going to be living on a street that you say, where does it go? And even the person living on it says, I'm not quite sure. There's one street that God makes reference to. He singularized it. The street of the city was pure gold. Only one street, and that street's made of gold, gold so pure that it resembles glass. Every step we take walking this street, every step is going to be the street of God. Every step. Wow, that just thrills me. We'll walk forever on God's highway. Hallelujah. Verse 22, there's a lot of preaching stuff going on that. Verse 22 says, and I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. When John saw this vision, he said, there's no temple here. Where's the temple? Maybe he said that to the angel that was once holding a vial, but now showing him the picture of this city. In that city, the entire place is the house of God. In that city. Wow. Notice verse 23. Verse 23, it says, and the city had no sun, neither of the moon, no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. Compare that with verse 11. Having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious. So you see the light. Now I come to verse 24 down through verse 26. Hang in there, we're almost done. Verse 24 says of the nations. Remember what I've said? There is a division here. Whether that new Jerusalem is hovering or whether it's in some other capacity, these nations are of the earth, the new earth. And it says, and the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, meaning that new Jerusalem. And why is it lit? Because of the glory of God. And the kings of the earth do bring their glory into it. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. And they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. Everything's open in this city. There'll be no secrets. The mysteries of God that it talks about in the Bible for us today, there'll be no longer mysteries. We'll have all the answers. The kings will bring their glory into it. They'll bow, they'll give honor to Christ. And the gates will not be shut at all during the day. And then it turns around and says, and there is no night. So what that's actually saying is there will be one with the gates and there being no night, there's 100% access 100% of the time. Verse 27. And there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination, or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. All other cities of this world today, they are great centerpieces of sin in many cases. Not in many cases are they. Every city has its center point of sin. But we're looking at a city that will not have sin at all. And that's where we are heading.
Amen.
The child of God, this is their home. Chapter 21. You say, what's it going to be like when I get there? The Lord will be to go back and re-study chapter 21. You say, no big deal, is it? Well, it's your eternal home.